everybody. Reporting to you again from the Glamour City, Hollywood.
It's so wonderful. And I think one of my favorite days is those, opening days when the kids get a chance to actually play on, the yard that they created and, experience how much fun it is. There's just a great amount of joy. I also, one of the things that we do a couple of weeks beforehand, before we open the yard, is actually have the kids who are involved in the design plant in the space. And I remember one time I had planted with some kids and we had planted strawberry plants. And when I came back for the opening, the kids ran up to me and said, "I think that there's something wrong with the strawberries we planted. They're all green." And I think to me that kind of underscored how important it was that we were doing this, because a lot of the kids in New York City live in apartment buildings, don't necessarily have a garden, but they're, in their yard, they were able to, for the first time, see sort of like cycle of a strawberry, that it goes from flower to green strawberries to red strawberries. And I think that that was really important to me, that we're creating sort of the next generation of climate scientists and the next generation of nature lovers, through the work that we're able to do.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Mary Alice Lee, Director of NYC Playgrounds Program, Trust for Public Land. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much, Scott. I'm excited to be here.
So I believe the New York City Playgrounds Program, Trust for Public Land, celebrated 20th years of service last year, I believe. And since 1996, the organization has helped transform 150 acres of barren asphalt school lots into some 209 vibrant playgrounds for students. Now, for listeners who are not familiar with your organization, what is the Trust for Public Land, and how is it transforming New York City schoolyards into outdoor spaces?
The Trust for Public Land is a national nonprofit, and we create parks and protect lands where they're needed most, so that everyone will have access to the outdoors for generations to come. And we do that in a myriad of ways. In New York City, since 1996, we've been working to convert either vacant lots or asphalt schoolyards into really beautiful community spaces that the schools can use during the school day and that are open to the public after school and on weekends. And so it was really interesting. In the late 90s, it started in New York City. At that point, the city wasn't doing as well economically. There were a lot of vacant lots around. And so New York City Parks Department and the Trust for Public Land joined together to work with community groups to design these spaces, and that the community would then help program. That was a great program. We were able to do a handful of sites using, at that point, just private donations. And then we, as the city got a little bit more economically, started to get a little bit better off, and there began to be a real housing crunch. There became less and less vacant properties. So GPL began to look at asphalt schoolyards. There are roughly 1,000 school buildings in New York City. A lot of them at that point just really had asphalt lots, perhaps with a basketball hoop or a handball wall, not really a lot of shade, and there was not really a lot of things to do. And so GPL thought, this is a great place for us to come in. And so we then started to work with schools to design and build playgrounds on their school properties. And that was really great because we're able to go in and work with the students. And I think having the users of the park be the designers of the park is such a great idea, because you're coming into a space, we work in all 5 boroughs of New York City, and you're coming into a space where the kids are the experts. They're the ones who are there every day, so they know where the shade is, where the sun is, where there's cracks in the asphalt, where the noisy parts are, where they want to hang out, and what they want to do in the playground. And so to us, that's really important through our design process to get that information from them. So we're working with the kids and really training them to be landscape architects. They're surveying the property. They're asking their fellow students and also their parents and neighbors about what they'd like to see in the finished park. They're thinking about themselves, about what they like to do, and maybe what their younger brothers and sisters or older brothers and sisters want in the yard as well. And so TPL started, to work for about 3 months. We go into a school and work, with elementary, middle, or high schools to design these spaces. And it's great. We work closely with the classroom teacher to make sure that the kinds of lessons that we're doing with the kids during this design process really matches what they're covering in their lessons. And so, a lot of times we're talking about things like when we're going out with measuring wheels and measuring the schoolyard, we're talking about area and perimeter. And then when we're talking about the budget, how much we have for the job, we're, getting them to add and subtract to make sure that we have we're spending just enough, all the pennies that we have, but not too much that we're going over the construction budget. And one of the special things that we're able to do is also talk a lot about green infrastructure and the importance of it. And so one of my favorite days is the day that we bring out something called Sewer in a Suitcase. The Center for Urban Pedagogy created this fabulous piece that we use, which is literally a suitcase that you open up, and it's kind of a little mini size of a city street. And it shows using brown glitter what happens when there's a regular rainstorm and the rain comes down on the city buildings, and the sewage treatment plant is able to process the sewage and water very easily and just releases clean water into the city's waterway. And then when there's more heavy rainfalls, which we unfortunately have been getting more and more of as a result of climate change, it shows that amount of water really overflows into the city's waterways, because the sewage treatment plant just can't handle that kind of amount of water going into its treatment plant.
Now, one of the things that you said that's quite interesting is New York invested into this area when economically, perhaps maybe the tax revenue wasn't there, and they sought out private funds to initiate this project to begin with. But the reason that's quite interesting is that if you look across the US, San Francisco, Chicago, many other cities where they were very vibrant and economically vibrant cities, but now because of homelessness and crime, they're struggling. And I think there's some lessons to be learned from New York City. And of course, there's incredible case studies about the subway and the work that, even just painting the subways on a daily basis and how it helped actually, deter crime, for instance, not just graffiti. So let's kind of go back a little bit back to the 1996. What was the backdrop, and how does improving some of these areas help not only attract new businesses and ultimately new tax revenues, but also psychologically provides kind of the safer space? And I wonder how that affects people's psyche.
Yeah, I think that parks are so important to really making a community feel more vibrant. I think one of the things we hear a lot from the schools is that once they've had a park renovation, that it really brightens up the block, and that often it actually increases their school attendance. So they often have less lateness because kids want to come early to play in the park. And they also talk about the fact that the yard becomes sort of an epicenter for community members to come and hang out because the parents are picking up their kids from school, or they're hanging out on the weekend, and people are meeting people that they hadn't met before or might not have met if it wasn't for the fact that they both decided to sit underneath the gazebo one sunny afternoon. And I think that's something that's really important, to be able to have those opportunities for people to have those connections, and also for neighborhoods that are low income or may have been overlooked for many years. It gives the kids who go to that school a sense of pride, and also of realizing that that they're important enough to be invested in, that someone thought about the fact that they deserve and need a safe place to play. And I think that can really make a difference in communities. And I think that we've heard again and again about the importance of that kind of public and private investment to make that happen.
And I think you make an excellent point. And just for a little bit of backdrop, 73% of low-income neighborhoods in New York fail to meet the city's standard for park areas per resident. And the fact that it provides not only a safe place, a place for the community to convene and to allow for new exchange of ideas, new connections, but this notion of almost ownership, a psychological pride that comes with it. And when we have that, we're less likely to throw away trash. We're less likely to treat it as, hey, this is the school property, this is the government property, but rather this is our property. We need to maintain that, correct?
You're so right, Scott. I think one of the wonderful things that we see with our yards is because we involved the students and also the community in the design of it, they really feel like ownership of it. And so they're there using it. And the more positive uses you have in a park, the less negative uses there are. And so I think that that is something we see that there's not as much vandalism or other issues in the playgrounds that have been designed by the kids and community, because people know about that. Often we have signs that actually say this park was designed by the kids. And we feel like that really helps, people think a little bit more about how special the park is.
And I think, over the years, you guys have really honed in on your methodology. And I think you're referring to that 3-month-long design process, including I think had alluded to working with the teachers, perhaps maybe creating curriculum for that hands-on design, even getting into engineering, budgeting, environmental stewardship. So really making a full, holistic, rigorous program that has a tactile and a tangible benefit to it as well. What are some feedback that you've gained? And I wonder, for the kids that have gone through some of these school systems and have enjoyed some of these playgrounds, what have you heard over the years, and how has it impacted their lives?
I think one of the great things I heard yesterday, we had a playground opening at a high school, and one of the kids spoke about how it was so important to feel like they were able to mitigate climate change through their playgrounds because they were involved in the design and thinking about adding green infrastructure pieces into their yard. For example, their turf field captures stormwater. There's also some permeable pavers, which are capturing stormwater also on site, and some garden there as well. And so they loved that they were able to do it right in their neighborhood, make things better. And I think that that's, a really great thing that can happen.
And I think that's an excellent point. I think sometimes when we live in a very dense urban environment, we look around and think, gosh, what can I do about mobility, mass transit? I mean, and as an individual, it's a very daunting thing, but yet here you're able to bring it down to a child level where they feel like the interaction that they're having by planting these trees, making and putting permeable pavers, rain absorbing gardens, all of these things, they have a tangible involvement in actually mitigating climate change, and they feel like they're part of the solution. And that's got to be very empowering for young people, right?
It's so wonderful. And I think one of my favorite days is those, opening days when the kids get a chance to actually play on, the yard that they created and, experience how much fun it is. There's just a great amount of joy. One of the things that we do a couple of weeks beforehand, before we open the yard, is actually have the kids who are involved in design plant in the space. And I remember one time I had planted with some kids, and we had planted strawberry plants. And when I came back for the opening, the kids ran up to me and said, "I think that there's something wrong with the strawberries we planted. They're all green." And I think, to me, that kind of underscored how important it was that we were doing this, because a lot of the kids in New York City live in apartment buildings, don't necessarily have a garden, but they're, in their yard, they were able to, for the first time, see sort of like cycle of a strawberry that goes from flower to green strawberries to red strawberries. And I think that was really important to me, that we're creating sort of the next generation of climate scientists and the next generation of nature lovers, through the work that we're able to do.
Well, I have to say, I'm originally from the San Francisco Bay Area, and I've always been terrible when it comes to growing type of vegetables or gardens or whatsoever. But since being in the East Coast, I've learned to become better at it. And I think it's really more divine intervention. And it really, if you just do the right thing around water and seeding and fertilizing, nature and God kind of takes care of it all. But it's amazing that even something like small things like strawberries, as an example, when they see that full life cycle and they see the result, and in some cases actually taste and enjoy the fruit of the labor, there's just this, the level of gratification isn't the same as if they went to the corner market, purchased the same set of strawberries, right? Again, it goes back to this notion of ownership, care, and stewardship. And it teaches them that in their lives, they can, in fact, have a very positive impact on broader societal and certainly climate impact, right?
I completely agree. I think one of my favorite moments was a couple of weeks ago. We had planted with some pre-K students, and we had planted a bunch of flowers, and we had released some butterflies at the same time. And one of the butterflies landed on one of the flowers that a kid had planted. And the kid got so excited, she was jumping up and down. She's like, it's working, it's working. What we planted, it's working. And it was just really nice to see that at every age, kids can really make a difference, in their neighborhood towards preventing climate change.
Now, I know so far we've been focused heavily on the environmental piece, but when we talk about the playground that you guys are installing, I mean, we're talking state-of-the-art play equipment, athletic facilities, in addition to garden and some of these other educational components. Can you talk about some of the other elements and why it's so innovative?
Sure, yeah. So we're able to put in turf fields, which capture stormwater. We also have green roof gazebos. So that's really wonderful because kids are getting a chance to see there's shade, and then there's shade underneath the green roof, and you can really tell the difference. It's really several degrees cooler. We're also teaching them about the importance of permeable pavers and permeable surfaces in general. It's always a little difficult because a schoolyard does need to have a lot of surface that's level because they do lineup and dismissal and physical education classes. So we're always trying to balance the amount of sort of asphalt that you still do have to put in with the amount of permeable pavers and other surfaces that we're able to do. And we're also adding garden with plexipave and bioswales. And these are all great things that look pretty, but that also are capturing stormwater and that the kids can get involved in planting.
Amazing. And again, I think you're referring to some of the green infrastructure aspects. And I think on average, some of these playgrounds are capturing some 750, 100,000 gallons of rainwater. One in particular in Queens, I guess, can capture as much as 1.1 million gallons per year. So pretty significant. And certainly over the recent years with really extreme climate change impact, we've seen subways and undergrounds get completely flooded and seen storms that we've really not seen before, at least the severity of it, right?
That's correct. We're fortunate that with all the green infrastructure that we put in to date, we're able to capture 47 million gallons of stormwater in our playgrounds each year, which is, a nice dent in the city's sewer system. And I think that what was interesting to us was there was a playground before we had done the design in Chinatown that had been completely flooded for weeks after Superstorm Sandy. But we had then gone in and in the intervening years and put in a green infrastructure playground. And when Hurricane Ida hit the city 2 years ago in September, the custodian called us up and said, there's not even a puddle in our yard after this green infrastructure has been put in. And he was just amazed. And I think that really underscores how useful these green infrastructure playgrounds can be for cities.
That is a wonderful story. It really is. And I think when we kind of zoom out and understand some of the projections that are out there, for example, Central Florida, that's expected to be potentially underwater based on some of the estimations and projections. And same with some of the fringe aspects of New York City, parts of New Jersey as well. So how do we think about in a kind of a broader policy and even civil engineering perspective around the fact that we're going to have to become more resilient? We're going to have to be more like Amsterdam to an extent. And it's just, you can't, it's not a matter of just abandoning buildings. You have to figure out how to make it work with more water and higher levels of ocean levels.
Yeah, I mean, I think we really have to rely on, more wetlands and really thinking about the kind of building that we're doing. And, I think New York is really smart about, trying to figure out different ways to protect our cities, through things like these green infrastructure elements. And I think I'm really happy to be part of the solution. And I'm really glad that we're able to, as I said, get the students involved, because, they're really the next generation who's also going to be dealing with this. And so it's wonderful that they're learning about this in a positive way and learning about things that they can do to make a change.
And I want to go back to the early part of the conversation that we were having around, let's say, some of the socioeconomic aspects of some of these neighborhoods. And again, maybe it was more severe in the 90s, perhaps, but some neighborhoods, it used to be prior to some of these playgrounds where people felt uneasy, uncomfortable, because maybe some of these lots were used for drug dealers or maybe crime. But now people feel like it's a safe haven place to hang out and to innovate, to experiment, and to grow and to nurture. I wonder, over the years, have you done any type of analysis or work with other think tanks around how your program has specifically negatively, meaning statistically reduced things like crime, drug use, and reincarceration and so forth, for example?
We haven't done that. That's a really wonderful idea that we'll have to take up. I think the evaluations that we've done have been more about activity levels. For example, we've heard that our playgrounds, we find that middle school girls are more active than they had been before the renovation, because we are giving them more to do. A lot of times we hear from girls that they feel a little intimidated about playing on a soccer field or a basketball court. So we're putting in things like, outdoor ping pong tables or volleyball courts that they feel more comfortable playing in. One school in the Bronx actually asked us to paint one of the courts purple, so that, of course, anyone could play basketball, but that it was more likely that the boys would play in a different court and the girls would be able to play on the purple court, so they'd have a chance to be more active. And so those are the kinds of studies we've done. But I definitely, think that we should look into to the crime aspect as well. That's an important idea.
Now, in 2023, we're in a very different environment economically and kind of a macro perspective than, say, 1996. However, the thing that I think that comes to my mind is, just like even in the private sector, where some of the greatest innovation happens during recessions, because we have to figure out how to be leaner, be more efficient, and be able to automate things, as an example. Hence, we talk about generative AI in our other podcast, innovation podcast. But in this case, in 2023, we have this probably a longer term, higher interest rate monetary policy that's going to probably continue for many, many years. We are trying to control inflation, but things are not the same, and material costs, labor costs has come up. And you got shortages and scarcity, including housing issues. And of course, people are feeling the pinch, right, with some layoffs and so forth. So guess where I'm going with this is, it's counterintuitive when, from the macro and the micro perspective, that you're under some of these constraints and pressures. And the natural thing for programs, NGOs, private or public, is to do less. But yet, what I'm hearing is maybe we need to do more. And that's kind of bucking the trend, but that's really what's going to make a difference. Now, for each playground, my understanding, it costs some $1.1 to $1.4 million funded through public and private funds. So what's the message that you want to share with others in terms of continue to fund these projects and really bringing it to more neighborhoods?
I think that, in the United States, there's about 100 million people that are not within a 10-minute walk of a park. And I think if you started to think about investing in more green spaces, we would be able to, really cut down on the amount of carbon dioxide emissions there are. So I think some estimates are that if we were to put a park within those 100 million people's neighborhoods, we'd be able to cut down 21% of our carbon dioxide emissions. And I think that's something to think about, because climate change is here to stay, and it's only going to make our lives worse. And so by investing now in things like more parks and reforestation and more land conservation, then it just makes more economic sense in the long term to be able to really save ourselves in a few years.
Well, I'm excited about what you guys are doing. And my question for you is, how are you guys sharing your best practices with other cities around the country, but also the world?
Yeah, I think we love sharing about what we're doing, and Trust for Public Land is now in 20 cities around the country, working on schoolyard programs like this, and we hope to just keep increasing, and so we're constantly reaching out to cities to figure out if there's a way for us to help them create this. And we've also been fortunate being in New York City to be visited by other cities, including people from Fiji, Paris, who have come to us, England, who have and Canada, who have come and asked us for some advice, and we've been happy to share our tricks to try to promote this around the world, because I think it's such a wonderful idea to have the students and community involved in designing a park that's right in their neighborhood, right at their local school.
Well, personally, I'm so excited about what you guys are doing, because it's one thing to tell our youth, our next generation, to take climate action seriously, do something about it, but it's another for them to imbue and to really live it and see the process from beginning to end and see the fruit of it. And I think those are important life lessons that's going to stay with them as they become young adults and adults and have their own families. And it's the small things that in aggregate starts to make a big difference. So with that, I have been joined by Mary Alice Lee, Director of NYC Playgrounds Program with Trust for Public Land. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.